Hey, Karen. It's Dana Williams. I'm so glad you're with us today. And we've had a fun in the green room this morning trying to get things going. But both of us have this let's just go mentality. And I think that is the whole philosophy here on Dominate Your Day is living authentically and being your best self every day. So I love the work you're doing and putting out in the world. And Karen, I'd love for you to give the audience a little glimpse of what you've been up to and where you are right now in your career.
Well, thank you for having me. And there's always a good story behind the story of
Uh-huh.
how the magic happens. So I'm delighted to be with you and talk about really my background of how we make better leaders, teams, and culture one story at a time. So I come from a career on both sides of the desk where I spent 20 years in corporate culture, like companies like General Electric and Deloitte, where I was working as a head of leadership development and a head of culture and helping people figure out how to bring their best and unleash the best of the people on their teams and how you shape the culture around the world. In General Electric, I was heading up a business of 90,000 employees in 150 countries, and I realized that it's really hard to get people to think about what they want to do differently and what is important to them. And I found that stories were such a dynamic way to connect with each person and have them think about what the culture meant to them and what the type of leader they wanted to be or what they wanted for their team. And so that was my deep foray into storytelling of using this and helping people all around the world be better leaders and teams. I opened my own company and crossed to the other side of the desk and have been building leaders and teaching people how to use storytelling to be a memorable communicator. I did a talk that ended up on TED, and that led to the book that I wrote, The Perfect Story. And it's all about this thinking that it's not enough to tell a story. The way you tell it makes a difference in the experience for the brain. And so breaking down what's happening in your brain when you experience stories and how to leverage that to be more dynamic in your communications. And that brings me to today, where I get to do that for people all around the world.
Wow. So what what was the catalyst that sparked your passion for storytelling? How did you realize its power and in leadership?
I backed into it. It was never this thing that was the only thing that I did. But as I was the head of culture and I found that I was trying to help leaders understand what our best leaders did or what a great team looked like, I would use stories for examples and realized people responded to them and they remembered them. And even most importantly, it gave them a chance to think of situations they hadn't encountered and think about what they would do when they would face them. And so it was always not what I did, but how I did it. And once I started to see how people responded, I thought, this is amazing. I had written this article, I wrote this article about when I was in the marching band in
Oh,
college.
oh, how funny.
Yeah, and it was about this moment with a football coach where he had come down to the band after a big football game, and he threw his hat into the crowd. And so it was this really inspiring story of this one moment that someone did that meant nothing to them but meant everything to other people. And I started to get emails all around the world from people sharing pictures of themselves in band uniforms or sharing stories of coaches and leaders that had shown up in their lives. And I was like, this is amazing. And why am I not doing it more? And so that moment showed me that there's so many different ways you can connect with people, and stories are that fundamental way to do so. It's the basic unit of understanding that we all exchange.
So, what was the research process? I'm in the midst of my book right now, so I can't even imagine you writing a book on storytelling and building strong cultures. What was it that when you started researching this and finding yourself telling stories that you wanted to make sure people got when you put this book out into the world?
The cool thing about the work I do is it's always grounded in neuroscience. So I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't play one on TV, but the heart of human behavior comes from what influences our decision making and what changes our behavior. And there's been so much understanding in the past 10 years even of our brains and how we decide and what impacts how we're comprehending and what influences us. And so I knew that that it wasn't enough just to tell a story, because we have all sat through so many boring stories and
Yes.
that is not enough. And so I wanted to break down, like, what is it that makes a story compelling for people? What is it that you need to do to make it be memorable and have an impact so that you're not wasting communications on people? And once I knew that, it was really easy to look at different research on decision making, on the neurochemicals that influence the way we form trust with people, the way that we feel connections of empathy, what actually is going to motivate and inspire. And that was the foundation that I built everything on, because I do believe it's not enough to tell a story. And so how you can understand what makes a great story and what to put in your story to make that happen made it a fun journey to go down.
So when you did your TED Talk and it talking about how brains respond to stories, what was one thing that you really kind of like resonated with people as you were telling about the neuroscience? Because you can only do a TED Talk in a short amount of time. A book, you can give more data and share all that neuroscience. But what was it in the TED Talk that helped people understand about how our brain responds to stories?
I know the exact moment, because there's a neuroscientist, Dr. Paul Zak, who has this platform that can measure through wearable devices. They can measure changes in your capillaries in your skin, and they see these moments where you have these spikes of oxytocin. So when you're listening to a story, you naturally feel empathy and compassion towards the storyteller. You feel like a bond, which is also why, like, if you're at a team offsite, you come away feeling closer to people. It's because you've been sharing stories and talking more informally, and you have this neurochemical shift that you experience. So Dr. Zak has found a way to measure what is this moment of immersion where you are experiencing a message, a story that is so compelling that your oxytocin spikes and you actually feel trust towards that storyteller. So I put my TED Talk through this and measured it, and I could see the exact moment, and it was the same for everyone. And it is a story about this neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio. He was studying decision making in people that had brain damage. So they had damage to the frontal lobe of their brain due to a brain tumor. They were fully functioning. They had jobs, they had relationships, they could eat, sleep, walk, talk. Like, you wouldn't know to look at them that they had experienced this damage. But the one thing they could not experience was they were unable to experience emotion. If you showed them a photo of a car crash or a fire or anything that would make us cringe, they had an emotionally flat affect because of this damage to their brain. And because they couldn't experience emotions, they couldn't make decisions. Like something as simple as, am I going to sort my computer files by the name or by the date, would render them helpless. And what Antonio Damasio found is that we make these decisions subconsciously based on our long-term memory. It's almost like if you take a photo on your phone and you swipe up, stamped on that photo is all this metadata about the f-stop and the aperture and the date and the location. Like, all this stuff is automatically stored on the photo without you doing anything. Our long-term memory is made up of emotional metadata. As you're taking in information through your senses and you're having experiences, they get stamped with emotions and stored in our long-term memory. And so when we're going to make decisions, we are subconsciously going through all that, going through our emotional metadata to inform those decisions that we make. So what he found in his patients is that they didn't have that because they weren't experiencing emotions. They didn't have this long-term memory of emotional metadata. But your average person does, and this decision making happens subconsciously. At the point you become aware of it is when you're applying the rationalization, which is why you naturally like buy the car because you love the color, but you're justifying it because of the gas mileage, which is fascinating to think about. And what stories can do is connect people to emotions, even on experiences they have never had, and that becomes a part of their long-term memory and can inform their decision making.
Wow. So when you were writing the book, The Perfect Story, was there one story you couldn't put in there, but you wish you could have?
There wasn't one that was left out. I think when you're writing a book on storytelling, you want to include as many stories as possible. And it was important to me not to have them just be business stories. sometimes it's easy to think about when you might use a story to open a presentation or for a big session, but I wanted people to also see everyday moments of like, how do you tell a story in a toast, or if you have to give a eulogy, or how do you use story in your everyday life? So it was, the bigger challenge was I wanted to use a story throughout to break down the different steps and show people how you can build it. And so figuring out which one to use for that was the challenge, but I don't feel like there was any that didn't make the cut.
So how did so you took one story and took it all the way through?
I did, yeah.
Wow. Can you tell a little bit of that story now, or is it
I
a shorter
can.
version? Yeah, I would love to hear. I'm
Yeah,
curious.
it's like
Yeah.
the 2-ish minute version. If you
Yes.
happen to see my TED Talk, it will sound familiar. It is
Okay.
a similar story. So it's about this woman, Maria, who walks into her office to get ready for her day at work, and she's in the elevator with her arms full. She's got folders and her lunch and her purse and her badge and her keys, all of it, and she goes to press the button, and her phone falls out of her hands and it bounces on the floor, and it falls right between that opening between the elevator cart and the floor, like that small 1-inch opening. Her phone goes down there, and she hears it hit the ground 3 stories below. And she's realizing it's not just her phone, which would be bad enough because our lives are in our phones.
Right.
But she had a phone wallet, and it had her badge for work, it had her driver's license, her credit cards, like everything in her life was there. She can't go to her office because she doesn't have her badge. She can't go to her car. So she goes to the front desk to talk to the security guard, and he smiles when he sees her because Maria is one of the few people that stops to say hello to him every day. She's one of these people that knows your favorite food and where you took your last vacation and when your birthday is, and not because she's nosy, but she just genuinely cares about people. And so she walks up to him, and as she starts to tell him what happens, his name was Ray, his smile just starts disappearing from his face. And he says, Maria, this is going to be so expensive because we're going to have to put in a service call, stop all the elevators, get down into the basement. Like, it's going to cost at least $500. And she's trying to weigh in her mind, like, what's the value of the cost of replacing all of those things? Is it worth it? And she said, can you just get a quote and we'll see? And I happen to be crossing through the lobby at this moment. I see Maria, so I offer to take her up to her office because I have a badge, she doesn't. So I get her in her office, and we're only there a couple minutes when her desk phone rings, and it's Ray, the security guard, and he says, Maria, great news. I can put in a service call because I noticed that the elevator is due for its annual inspection next month. I can call that in today, and we can get your phone back for free.
Oh, wow.
Amazing, right? So same day this happens, I'm reading an article in the New York Times about Walt Benninger, the CEO of Charles Schwab, who recently retired, but at the time he was the CEO. And he was describing his last exam when he was in university. He had a straight A average, business student, goes into the exam, had been studying for days, is expecting to ace the exam. He gets in there, and the instructor passes out a sheet of paper, and everyone looks at it, and it's blank on both sides. And the instructor says, I've taught you everything there is to know about business except this one thing, this most important thing. Write down the name of the person that cleans this room. And his heart sank because he had seen her, but he had never met her. And he learned that day that her name was Dottie. And he made this vow to always know the Dotties in his life because he just felt so embarrassed that he didn't know and he wanted to know. And so he made that vow because both he and Maria understand that the role of a leader is to help people feel seen and valued regardless of what their role is. So that is the story that I break down throughout the book of how do you take a story and construct it and put in all the different elements that's going to make the brain pay attention to it.
Well, not only what I heard in the story was an interesting story, but I also heard 2 different stories woven together. But then the key red thread of consistency was, this is what a leader does.
Yeah.
So you brought in the leadership angle, which is amazing.
That's why that story won, though, because it shows how you can combine 2 stories that sometimes makes an idea better. Maria's story alone is interesting. Walt's story alone is interesting, but you put them together and it's like, oh, this is just a whole different level and experience. And so that made it the perfect story to break down in the book to show different things that you can do with a story.
So have you been storytelling your whole life? Is this, do you
In
remember?
different shapes and forms, yeah.
Yeah.
I have always done that as a way to communicate, and a lot of my work in leadership development, you're breaking down complicated ideas, and so stories are a big part of that. And there's a continuum of storytelling from metaphors and similes and examples to your full-blown story. And I found I'm always trying to think in these ideas and these concepts that help create understanding for people.
So I always say, when you look back and you think about what was your favorite story that you would like favorite day at work, what can you describe that for me? Like if you can think of your favorite something, it could have been at Deloitte, it could have been at GE, it could have been an internship. Just what
Yeah.
comes to your mind?
I don't have a favorite day at work, but I have a story about it.
Okay.
When I was debating opening my company, I was speaking to a mentor of mine whose last name happens to be Wisdom, if that's not incredible enough. So,
Wow.
Mr. Wisdom was giving some wisdom. And he asked me this question. He said, what would be your ideal day at work? And I started talking about, well, it would include this and this and this and this. And, I put some ideas out there. And he finished and he's nodding. He said, yeah, that's not your ideal day at work. And I was like, oh, really? Please do tell me what my ideal day at work is. And I was thinking too narrowly. I was thinking about all the different environments I had been in and not really like what are the things that make my heart sing. And so he stepped back and he painted this vision of like, well, you would probably start your day with a run and then you would be doing this and you would have a few coaching sessions here and you would be doing a workshop and you would be speaking. And he painted this picture that was just broader than I was thinking. And he finished and I sat back and I was like, how do you know my ideal day better than I do? But
Wow.
I was trapped in the confines of what I had only seen, and it made me think completely differently. So, my ideal day, I think, is still to be determined.
Yeah. And you probably, like when you were doing the TED Talk, you probably had some charge boosted from doing that. And there was something in your internal talents that was just boosting you to do that. And you probably felt good, right? Did you feel good when you finished it?
I did. It's speaking is such an interesting thing because it's a big part of the work that I do. So I am an introvert, and I am an introvert that does best when I have time to think and internalize and restore my energy. I do like people, I do like being around people, but I need that restorative time. And one of the interesting things about speaking is it's a very introverted activity because 80% of it is thinking about ideas and how you want to package them and how you want to put them together to create meaning for people. And 20% of it is the delivering piece of it. So to me, when you get to the place where you're bringing it on the stage and sharing those ideas and connecting with people, it's very satisfying because the goal is always to help build ideas for people. It's not about being on stage and having attention.
So when I hear like your background in instructional design, did you do design for class for organizations, the two organizations that we talked about, Deloitte and GE? Was that part?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how did that shape your leadership development as you were, working on that background and where you are right now? And why leaders? Why are you focused on leaders right now?
I am a big believer in creating work environments that are not only tolerable but enjoyable. Too many people go into work and have a bad day because of their leader or the environment that they're in, and it doesn't need to be that way. And I think when people think about culture, they think about the tone that the CEO sets, and that's not culture. It's the day to day that people experience. And so helping people recognize that we have so much more influence over that day to day, and there are things that the everyday leader can do that can create a positive environment for people is so fun. And that's where you shape culture. That's where you create the environment that is interesting. And that's always a place that I feel is productive and helpful to spend time on. So it's what I've learned is that people get stuck and they love to offer all of these protests for why they can't do it or why it's hard. And so I always try to go at it and really challenge those protests of let's think about all the reasons why you don't want to do this or you feel you can't do this because so much of it is mental, and then help you recognize what you can do and what you can make an impact on and equip you with the things to actually get there.
What's your favorite experience working with a leader and helping them tell their story and build storytelling into their communication, to their culture, and to their leadership? Do you have one that comes to mind?
I think it's it's an incredible honor to be able to help people with that. You know, storytelling is a vulnerable experience, and I'm not talking about when you're telling a personal story. It's just a different style of communicating. It's very easy to put together 25 slides and get up and focus on maybe the formatting of them, but not what you want to say, and you just kind of talk at them, which is what so many people do. Not because they want to be a terrible communicator, they just run out of time, and through the grind of it, they don't get the chance to think about what they want to say. And so when I can help people flip that and start with, who is this group and what is it you want them to think or feel from your message, and what action do you want them to take? What do you want them to know or do? And where's their mindset today? What are things that might be mental hurdles in getting them to the things that you want for them? Like, once we start there, before we pick up any slides, and help them really center on the message and then think about what they need to get there, they realize like it's a completely different experience than opening up a bunch of different slides and piecing together the quilt of messages from stuff we've done in other places, which is not effective. So I love helping leaders flip that and think about their message first and how they put it together, and help them realize it's not as hard as they think, and that they can bring themselves into these communications, because that's what people want. They want the reality of it. And we overuse the word authenticity, but we overuse it because people are not authentic enough.
Right.
They feel like there's a version of themselves that they have to show up as, and people detect that, and it doesn't feel genuine.
So when you are working, and right now our world is, there's just so much content, right? And it's how do you ensure and help them make sure that their stories cut through all this noise? I hear, making sure you understand who the audience is and connecting with them, and what is your purpose. But are there any other tools or suggestions from your book that help leaders as they're trying to figure out how does their story cut through, and how do they ensure that their story is I said, has that neuroscience that you're looking for, that connection point?
The best thing is specificity. So when you know who your audience is, and you can get really specific on who they are and give examples that are going to be meaningful to them, it feels really genuine. So some of the audience I work with are people that are Generation X that are based in the US and saw the TV show Golden Girls. And so let's say I was talking to an audience and we were going to mention to Golden Girls or a joke about that. Then they sit up and they pay attention and it resonates. Now, that's not going to apply to everyone. So you've got to really think about who is your audience and what are the specific examples, the specific ideas, metaphors that you can work in, because that specificity is what people connect with and they remember. And that's what makes you feel real and genuine. The reason why so many messages fall flat is we have corporate speak and we just use acronyms and terms and things that make your brain go into lazy mode and not pay attention. But when you use specific examples, when you use specific analogies and details, that makes people pay attention. That's what kicks the brain into leaning forward.
Wow. You're really bringing a lot of the neuroscience behind all of this. And what do you hope when people pick up your book, The Perfect Story? What do you hope that they can do after they've read that book?
My goal was to make storytelling accessible. So for people that feel like they don't know how to tell a story or they're not good storytellers, they can see steps to get there. And it's steps because there's a methodology. It's hard to sit down in one pass and get a story right beginning to end. So this breaks it into steps so that you can see how to incrementally improve it or how to back up if it's not working. And if you're a great storyteller, it gives you more things to lean into and play with to make your stories be more dynamic. The goal is to meet people where they're at and give them the tools so that they can feel more comfortable in the way they're communicating.
Is there some kind of, I was thinking, whenever I speak or work with a group, I'm always kind of preparing, but it's like, is there some, and I know you said that, you're introvert, which I love that you say that. And I've had a lot of introverts on the show that are making big impact in the world. And I love that. What I want to talk about is when you're creating your creative process, what does your creative process look like when you're creating something, a story? Are you creating the story and then going and practicing it on people and then before you get to that final point of sharing it with others? how does one, like if a leader's working on a presentation and they want to tell a story, do you recommend they go ahead and write the story out and practice it a couple times on different people and see what happens? Or is there a method for that?
Yeah, I think of it in three parts, and it does vary based on what works for each person. So, what works for me, because I am introverted, I need to write it out and think about it in writing, and sometimes it's thinking about it while I'm walking, but I'm getting the story down on paper. So, part one is get the story out. For people that are extroverted that think aloud, it might be just talking to someone, but it's laying out what do I think the story is. Step two is, okay, let's now test this on someone and see what are they taking away from it? What are the pieces that are really catching their attention? What are the pieces that are confusing, that need refining? And then step three is, how do I take the story and tell it live? Because if it's been written, it's a different story. The way you tell it live is going to be different than the way you tell it on the page. Or even if you've learned it or thought of it verbally, it's now thinking of how do I add the nonverbal elements to it, the pacing, the pause. If there's people in it, how do I personify the different people? How am I using inflection? It's just thinking about how to take those things and make it be meaningful. So the first two you want to get down because you want to make sure your story is solid and you know that it works and you know what works about it, because then you can play with the different pieces and the delivery aspects of it to make sure that it's more dynamic when people experience it.
I had a coach one time that said, write down all your stories, all the stories of times in your life that you had pivots, and just keep those stories handy and then go back and tweak them and read them. And I thought that I had never done that exercise, but where I had pivots in my life and I found all these things, but I found stories that I didn't even know were there. What is your recommendation for people to help them find stories? Because the normal person who's a leader is like, oh, I don't have a story. I love the marching band story. I love the elevator story. But you just naturally are probably gifted at that, at finding the stories. But for those that don't think creatively and think, oh, there's a roadblock there, I don't have any stories. How do you get them going to find those stories?
Yeah, it's a first step. This is before you actually need to tell a story. You're going to create a toolkit of potential ideas. You're not going to worry where you're going to tell the story, who you're going to tell it to, or even why you're going to tell it. I have a series of prompts to help trigger your thinking. So just like you said, when was there a pivot? What's something that pisses you off? Because gosh, there's so many stories in those moments.
Yeah.
There's personal things to think about, like what's something you should have gotten rid of but you just can't part with, or what was your first concert? Professionally, there's so many stories, something you've learned from someone, or a moment you struggled, or a day when you thought, this is why I do this work. It could be things from how you move through the world. You may have a favorite city or a piece of art or some piece of music that you love. And so there's a series of prompts that I give that are meant to trigger your thinking. And just like you said, you're going to notice that things pop up and you want to capture it. I have an Excel spreadsheet of potential ideas so that when it's time for me to tell a story, I don't have to think like, I don't know what story to tell. I can go down this list and see
Smart.
which one of these will help me build an idea around whatever I want for this audience. And most of the time, it's actually nothing on the list, but through the process of working through the list, it triggers a whole new idea that I hadn't thought of. So your goal is create this toolkit of ideas before you ever need to tell one, just like you got that advice, because it makes it so much easier when you know who the audience is and you've thought through what you want them to experience, because that's really the first step in storytelling, isn't the story or idea, it's getting really clear on your audience. Then you can come back and pick which one is most meaningful for that.
Wow, that's a great idea. Great advice. Are those prompts in your book or in
Yeah,
your workshop?
I have some there. I regularly share them on LinkedIn. It's all whatever you can do to get your brain going, because starting from a blank sheet of paper is really hard, but having something to react to is definitely easier.
So right now, as we look ahead to 2026 and beyond, are there some emerging trends that you're seeing in business storytelling?
Yeah, the biggest is, of course, AI, right? I think every other post is about AI, and I feel like people are over-rotating on it, just like they've over-rotated on data analytics and do we work remotely or in person, or insert whatever trend. The biggest challenge I see in all of this is everybody treats everything as an either or instead of an and, right? The work from home, remotely, or work in person, it's an and, it's not an either or, all of these things. And so the same thing with AI. It's how can you leverage it in a way that's meaningful? So you can go to a chat GPT and say, I need to tell a story about trust and generate some ideas for me, and it will give you ideas, and you might see one and get excited because here's an idea, I don't have to think of it, and great, I can leverage this and go. But there's a difference between that excitement of here's an idea in front of me and the excitement you feel to share something, which is the heart of storytelling. Think about when you're with friends and you want to share a story over dinner and you're excited to share it, or when you connect with someone, say you're getting coffee at an offsite and you're sharing stories about your background or your career, and you feel that excitement to share it and hear it. That can't be replaced. And that's how you found the right story, where you feel this draw to it, that you want to share it. And so the challenge with AI is it's a helpful starting point. It's a helpful way to get some words on a page to react to, but you still need to take it and do work with it and think about what your version of it is and how you connect with it and where your excitement with it is, because that's where you're going to make the idea meaningful for people. They're going to view it authentically. It's going to have even more impact than just any type of communication. I think there's this fear of what happens to all of our roles as AI becomes more prevalent, and being a dynamic communicator is one of the greatest things you can do, because there's always going to be a need to connect with people, to inspire people, to influence people. And this is a skill worth investing in to be able to stand out from others.
If you had thought, 5-10 years ago that you'd be writing a book and doing all this right now, what has been the most surprising for you as you look back now and where you are right now and the impact you've been able to make by just stepping out and stepping into this action of helping people tell their stories? What's been
My favorite thing is the same reason why everyone should tell stories. About once a week, I get a message from people that have seen my TED Talk or have read the book, and they're sharing some story of their own of how it meant something to them or how it connected with them. And this is one of your signs that your story works. It's the I see your story and I'll raise you a story, where people are telling you a story in return. It's such a beautiful way to meet people and learn things about them and connect with them in ways that I never would have before, and to do so quickly too. And so it's the reason all of us should be willing to embrace it. I do want to caution, there's always this nervousness of, but I don't want to share something personal. Personal doesn't mean private.
Right.
Every person is going to think about what is private to them and they don't want to share, and that's going to vary person to person. So I don't really talk about family. I don't tell stories about that, but I will happily tell you stories about mistakes that I made, because there's a reason for that. That isn't personal to me. And so recognize that storytelling is vulnerable, but it doesn't mean that you're sharing your most intimate things or that you're oversharing. It's that you're communicating in a genuine way so that people can connect to it and think about their own experiences in your story.
Your story about talking about people writing in about their stories is really reminding me of, I spent 25 years at Southwest Airlines, so in marketing and communications and culture. And one of the things, anytime we met anybody and you said, I work at Southwest, they always had a story.
Yes.
Always. Always. There was not one time I met somebody they didn't have a story. And I just thought that's the way all, because I had been there my whole branded life, my whole life in corporate. And to me, when you bring up that it's so important, you're hitting that, resonating that level with your clients and your followers, is when they tell you a story back.
Yeah,
And
and
it's such a
Southwest is such a
powerful
great
message.
example. Southwest is such a great example because they have such a strong culture. You're getting these stories that are reinforcing your culture and what people are valuing in it and what their experience is, which is a huge gift.
Yes. And even in the midst of change that they've gone through and everything, I haven't been there for 5 years, but it's been wonderful to watch and remind people that they're the brand. Wherever they go, they carry that brand with them, and that storytelling of all the things that they've accomplished in a fun way. I mean, there's just stories all the time. So I'm a big fan of storytelling. I'm a big fan of authentic storytelling, and I love what you're doing. is there anything, Karen, that I didn't ask you that you want to make sure this audience hears today as we
Yeah,
get ready to close out?
people will sometimes ask me, like what's hard for me, and I have days where it's hard to tell stories too.
Sure.
I don't always get it right, but that's not a reason not to do it. It's recognizing that no one's going to come to you and say, please tell us a story today, like we're, children seeking a
Story time.
bedtime story. Right. And so it's recognizing you have to go and look for these moments. And sometimes it's in a coaching conversation with someone. Sometimes it is when you're kicking off a meeting, or maybe you're taking a team through another change and you know that they're feeling a little tired, or you're trying to connect on a human level. When I facilitate offsites, I make sure we've got stories in there all the time. But storytelling is something I learned to do because I really started to see the reaction that people get. And so when you accept that you have to go look for these moments, and that there are things you can do that make it easier to help you find stories and connect with people in the moment, then you're going to start to see this is such a more dynamic way to communicate that can make a big difference.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Wow. Karen, this has been amazing. I can't wait to read your book and really get into it. You've shared so many great bits of wisdom about storytelling, and even from different viewpoints, but how a leader can integrate it into their work life, and then not even think about it like every time they're doing a presentation, but just dealing with the day to day of their team and all that they're doing. So we're thrilled that you're here with us today. Can you let the audience know the best way to find you and your book?
Yep. My website is my name, KarenEber.com. You can find links to the book in there, and I regularly have articles, newsletter posts about storytelling. There's a bunch of free resources in there to dig into to learn different aspects of it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for being with us today and sharing your wisdom. We wish you the best, and excited to dig into more of your content. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.